On the next episode of What Are We Doing Today? The project is a pressure washer rebuild, specifically rebuilding the pump on this unit. This is a 10-year-old pressure washer that's closing in on 400 hours of service. It has worked flawlessly. I'm very happy, have been very happy with it, but it's getting, a little older and tired. It needs some TLC, it needs some attention, and that's what we're going to do. So I'll get into some of those details in just a moment. This is a John Deere branded product. However, there is absolutely nothing about this that's John Deere, with the exception of the green cart and the decals. This unit has a Honda GX 390 engine, and I think this is my favorite engine in this class. It's smooth, quiet, reliable, has not given me 1 ounce of trouble, and I don't see anything from Briggs to Kumsa or any of the Chinese knockoffs that even come close to this. It's fantastic. I really like it. The engine is mated to an Annovi Reverberi pump, and they probably botched the Italian pronunciation of the name, but in the US it also goes as AR. So you'll hear AR pump this, AR pump that. The model number is 4G40B. It is rated at 4,000 PSI and 4 gallons per minute. And yes, I am well aware that the cart states 3,800 PSI and 4 gallons per minute, which is slightly less on the pressure side, but did they do something with this engine mating to this pump, or they did some type of gear reduction, or they detuned it in some way? I'm really not sure, and it doesn't really matter, because as long as it's producing like between 36 and 3,800 PSI, I'm pretty happy. This is a very stout, very strong pressure washer. It is great for driveways, sidewalks, patios, etc., and it will wear you out. I mean, it is, both hands on the wand at full pressure. If you're using this for any length of time, you're going to feel it. You're gonna wake up the next day with a stiff neck or pain in your shoulder or something. I mean, it gets on with it, and for that reason, I really like it. It's always, it performs really well. So you can clean a lot of surface area in a little amount of time, and it doesn't miss a beat. So what are we going to do here? Well, first of all, the engine is the only thing on the engine that needs attention is probably the carburetor. Units like this, of course, are put away for months on end, and usually during the winter, and if there's any fuel left in the carburetor whatsoever, you're going to have some gumming or probably some type of issue there. So I'll take the carb off, I'll clean that up. I've done that in the past. I typically try to store these units with the carburetor dry, meaning that on the last use I ran all the gas out of it. But in this case, late last summer or early fall, I think a family member borrowed this, and when I got it back, of course, I didn't really think about before putting it away that I had not got the gas out of it, but I'll take care of that. Not a big deal. Now, as for the pump consists really 2 parts here. You got the pump body, or I also kind of call this the gearbox, and this is the pump head. And I have rebuild parts for all of this. As you can see here on top, I'll just go over these very quickly. This is a seal kit for inside the pump body, or what I call the gearbox, and those seals, that's part number 2189. The one in the middle here, this is actually the valves, or I tend to call these pistons. Some people call them plungers. I've heard all kinds of things, but these are the valves. This is kind of the business end of the pump, and the part number is 2186 for those parts. And then over here you have another set of seals and gaskets, O-rings, etc., that are actually for the unloader, and that is part number 2190. To be a little bit more specific, The unloader is right here. That is, I don't know why they call it an unloader, but to me it's the pressure adjustment knob or valve, because that's what you use for that. So it's got a plus or minus there, and you can rotate it as you need to. But I've got seals and parts for all of that. I didn't buy the overall rebuild kit because I'm not rebuilding everything. I'm just doing selective things, and that's all I really needed. So we'll get into this in just a moment, and we'll take a quick break. Okay, let's get into some more details, and hopefully this will be informative. If you were observant, you probably noticed that I had already loosened the valve caps on the top of the pump head, and those were very tight. Keep in mind, this is a 10-year-old unit. This has been through a lot of heat cycles, and I think there was also some type of thread locker on there. So when I put this back together, I'll probably use maybe like a Loctite or something like that. Got various forms of that for automotive applications, so I'm sure I'll have something that'll work. But what I've done is I've already removed the valve from this cylinder right here, and we'll just take this off and have a quick look from above. You can see that there are two holes in the bottom of the valve seat, or the piston, whatever you want to call this. And then I've got two valves side by side. I've got the one that I removed, and I've got a new one next to it. So as you can see, the one on the left has some corrosion and rust, and the one on the right looks pristine. It's brand new. So what happened here? If you've watched any of the AR videos, the ones that the company produces, of course, when they take things apart or put them together, it's really smooth and it's really easy. And of course, nothing goes quite like you would expect unless you've got experience. So these valves, or the valve that I took out of there, did not want to come out. And I tried a pick tool. I tried, a couple different approaches. Got a lot of different tools to try and remove something like that. But of course, you've got to be careful, because this is a brass head and you don't want to damage the threads, you don't want to damage anything. So I finally was able to use needle nose pliers and get a real grip on this, and just pulled it with pretty considerable force to get it removed, but nothing like you see in the company videos where it all just comes apart and goes back together so nicely. So what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to replace the three that you see. And I'll put that valve cap right there, and that's kind of what they look like on the bottom. So like, again, it had some thread locker on it. I will take this and I will do a light coating of like plumber's grease or something. I won't slather it on there. I'll just do a nice thin film, and then I will go ahead and insert that and make sure that it's properly seated, and I'll put it back together. Now, interestingly enough, there are three here that you see, 1, 2, 3, and on the back side, coming from the pump body, there are 3 more of these. So 3 on top, 3 on bottom, or however you want to look at that. And the body actually contains the pistons as well. There are 3 pistons in here. There's a bunch of seals, and there's oil. So I'm doing the easy part first, so to speak, but I'll get this all taken care of. On to the next step. Okay, we did encounter an issue with removing the valves from the valve seats. The one on the left, as I mentioned, did require considerable force, and it did eventually break free. The one in the middle and the one on the right did not cooperate, and they are currently seized. To give you some perspective, this is the one valve that I did remove, and on this one and this one, I pulled the white plastic clean off of the metal part of the valve. So the spring, the little circular door, everything came out. The only thing remaining on this and this valve seat, or within the valve seat, is that metal ring on the bottom, which is partially corroded on this one. But there was a lot of visible rust and corrosion on both of these. So what I've done is, you can see the brown liquid, that is PB Blaster. We're going to let this soak overnight, and hopefully we'll have some results in the morning. If it does not produce satisfactory results, I will simply take a torch to it, heat it up, and see if I can break things free using that method. So hope for the best. We'll check back in the morning. Okay, let's do a brief status update here. We still have the same situation as before. The middle and the right valve seats still contain the bottom portion of the valves, and these have soaked in PB Blaster for the better part of 3 days. I have been out here working on them in between a little bit, trying to loosen these up. But again, we're still in the same position we were before. I haven't damaged anything, which is good. And to kind of rehash, this is a valve. The orientation is like this. Because these were so corroded and stuck in those valve seats, when I pulled the plastic white piece completely off the valve. And of course that brought the spring and the little trapdoor, if you will, out with it. The real problem is the springs on these corrode. The bottom piece is actually aluminum, but I think that the two pieces above that, or at least the spring, is a metal that corrodes and rusts. So that's why those are all gunked up and they're not cooperating. I'm going to keep working on this. As you can see, there's a little bit of meat there. I could probably use a bolt extractor or something like that to get these out, but I have to have something to actually grab onto to forcibly pull these out, and haven't had any luck with that so far, but I'll keep working on it and we'll continue this project. Okay, I have had some degree of success. I was able to remove the bottom of the valve here in the right valve seat or barrel, and I've done so without any damage to the brass whatsoever. So how did I do this? I used this well, I'm not even sure what size bolt this is, but it is a self-tapping bolt. I took and ground the tip of this off so it would not bottom out in the brass, and then I basically tapped that into place, and I used it as an extractor, and then was able to had a lot of meat here to pull on, versus the plastic piece, which just pulled apart due to all the corrosion, which you can see very clearly here. It's pretty nasty. So anyway, mission accomplished on one of the valves, and I will work on the center valve now and get this project moving on. All right, quick confirmation that the last of the stuck valves has been removed, and you can see this one still has a little bit of the white plastic on it. Not quite as corroded as the other one, but most importantly, the brass has not been, the brass valve head has not been damaged in any way. It's still good. It's all smooth. I've checked it, wiped it out, and we are good to go. So mission accomplished and without any damage or additional expense. Moving on to the next step. I have drained gear oil from the pump body above here, and that was about 8 to 10 ounces of fluid that came out of the unit. I'll take this to recycling and I'll refill with fresh oil when the unit is reassembled. The drain bolt is a 17 millimeter brass bolt, exactly like the bolts found on top of the pump head here. So as you can also see, I removed the pump head. The head is secured with 8 Allen head bolts. They're 5 millimeter in size, and they're here on top of the engine. You can see that some of them are corroded, some of them are rather clean, and a couple of them did fight me. But no marring, no issues, nothing's broken or anything like that. So that's all good. But again, those are 5 millimeter. Now back to the pump real quick here. Of the 8 you have to remove, the difficult one is right there because of the output here to the hose. It's not something you can access with a socket, or at least not a normal Allen socket. If you have a deep socket or a long shank socket, then it should work. Otherwise, you're going to have to use just a normal Allen wrench to get to that one. And then when you take the pump head off of the pump, it doesn't just pop off, okay? You have to kind of gently work it off of the pump body. And what you're really doing is you're pulling it back off of the pistons that you see here. So you want to be, I don't know, gingerly, or you just want to be careful, gentle. You don't want to just yank this thing off or try to pry it off, because really what you're doing is you're pulling those pistons through that that pump head, and you've got to create some distance here to actually get it separated. So as you can see on the back side, there are 2 brass rings or caps, whatever you want to call those, that are still on the body, the pump head. And the one on the right actually stayed in place. It's laying here on the floor. So why did that happen? Well, it actually was still, let's stick this on there. It was actually still on the piston on the right. And why is that? Well, the piston on the right has a little bit of corrosion on top. And actually this was kind of just, it was rusty, but I used a brush. I just brushed it off with this to clean it up a little bit. So as we saw before, everything on the right side of this pump to the center and to the right going this way, that's where most of the corrosion was, and especially here. So that was the case, at the pistons. The one on the right was a little dirty, and I wasn't planning on replacing pistons as part of this project. In fact, I don't think I'm going to. I'm just going to, clean this up a little bit more, button it all up, put it back together, and I'll earmark this for piston replacement in the future. There's nothing that piston on the right is going to do in terms of hampering or slowing down the unit or anything, or impairing the unit in terms of its operation. It's just something that should be replaced here in the future. So and then let's go back to the pump head just for a minute. I'm hoping you can see inside of that. Again, look at the one on the right. It's brown, it's rust, it's corrosion. The others are white, and I'm scratching my head wondering, once I get these brass caps off here, the ones on the left that are still in place, are the valves going to fight me the way the valves did above? It's probably logical. That's that's what's going to happen, so I'm going to have to deal with that. But anyway, making good progress here. And just one last comment. One thing I'm really happy with is this. Look at the piston seals. They're dry, so they are not leaking. There's oil that sits behind those seals. Nothing's leaking there. And another comment to make is there is no gasket, or there are no gaskets between the pump body and the pump head, or what you would say, this is the oil side and this is the water side. So obviously there's lots of O-rings and other types of plastic. There's plastic and rubber O-rings, and there may be in some Viton or something like that, but those rings are all that really hold back the oil on one side and hold back the water on the other side. But there's no actual gasket material. It's metal to metal when you put the pump head against the pump body. So just wanted to clarify that. The pump is fully disassembled. I have all the parts on display here on the workbench. And just a quick comment, my videos are not intended so much as how-to videos as they are how to do what they don't show you or what they don't tell you. I do advise you to go over to the AR YouTube channel. They have excellent videos of assembly, disassembly, teardown, rebuild for all the pumps that they manufacture, and they also have a video for this particular pump. However, there are things that you will encounter, and a number of snags and things that that you're not going to see in those videos. They're working in a lab environment. They're working with fresh new parts where everything goes together, seamlessly and smoothly. And
everything comes apart, goes back together perfectly. It doesn't always work that way, as we all know. And, they're the manufacturer. They've done it 100 times. You're going to do this maybe once every 3 to 5 years, assuming you don't just get fed up and throw your pressure washer in the garbage and buy a new one, which would be a shame because these are great pumps and it doesn't take very much effort to rebuild them. But there are some things you have to be aware of. So let's get into a little bit of that, a little bit more. And one more thing, be sure that you go to the AR website and pull up the diagram for your respective pump, whether it be this pump or another pump. They have, great part breakdowns, diagrams, and they tell you the kits that you will need and all of that. It's not perfect, and I'll get into that in just a moment because we have a situation here that is, something was missing, but I'll talk about that in a moment. So let's talk about these kits. So on the right, we have the valve kit, the valve seal kit, I should say. We have the valves themselves here, and we have the unloader. This is the most expensive kit that you're going to purchase. It's probably $55 to $70 online, depending on the supplier. The valves are about $30, and this kit here is about $10, and we're talking US dollars here. So not super expensive to buy what you need to rebuild this pump, and you may not need all of that. You may skip the unloader, but again, 55 to 70, 30, and about $10. Now, how did I get this apart? That's kind of an interesting question. So everything is out of the pump. It's also been cleaned up. You're going to find a lot of calcium and lime, and I do recommend that you get yourself some brass brushes. As I reach across the workbench here, you get something like this, get something like these, which are kind of like pipe cleaners, but they are brass wire, and they'll help you clean up the barrels, the valve seats, and all those things, so you have a really clean way to go about putting everything back together. But so I had two problems. I had to get these caps, the two that were stuck, off of the pump head, and I did that by keep in mind they were still on here, so I actually used a pick tool and I removed the O-ring, which sits right inside of the lip there. And that gave me basically a biting surface, so I could use something like this to go inside and just pull forcibly and get that to separate. You can't pry these out because of the way they're made, and this is brass. You don't want to booger up the brass. But if you try to pry it out, it's not going to work. It's too deep, and the way the surface is here and everything, you're going to have to come up with another way, something like what I've done. It's almost like a slide hammer almost. But that worked really well. Now, when I got that apart, then I had to deal with, the valve, well, getting all the O-rings and seals out. That's first. But then in the bottom of each of these barrels were the valves. And the valves, again, here's a reference. This is one of the valves that came out. And then what I did this time, instead of trying to use needle nose pliers, I actually drove bolts, these self-tapping bolts, into the center of the plastic. And that gave me something really nice to pull forcibly and pull these valves out of the barrel, or out of the valve seats. Here's another one with a slightly smaller bolt. So I tried different things, but if you try to use needle nose pliers, you could end up ripping up off the plastic, as I did before, and then you've got a different kind of problem. So those were my solutions for getting this apart and doing it correctly. Now let's put the pump head. Well, I want to lay this here just for a minute. Okay, so these O-rings go to the bolts on top of the pump head, and then these rings go, on the outside rear of the pump head. And everything you see here, like that O-ring goes on the outer edge of this, and then these are loaded in the order that you see back into the valve body. And it's pretty simple. The orientation is you want the crowned part of each of these, the crown part of each of these facing outwards, and the cupped part like this. So this is the orientation. They kind of get stacked on top of one another. But something is not quite right here. And if you look at all the parts laying on the bench, something's missing. And what's missing, if you haven't figured it out, are these. These are not included. They're called support rings, and they're not included in kit 2189, which is very frustrating because the AR video leads you to believe that the support rings are in that kit, but they're not. And there's a discrepancy. If you look at the diagram provided by the manufacturer, these are actually in a separate kit, kit 2191. It's I think it's all $5 to $7 for that kit, but they are not. They're kind of like standalones almost. So why is that? Well, I'm really not sure. I mean, this is it's nylon. It's very robust. I could probably reuse these and not have any problem, but seeing as how I do have it apart, why not do it correctly, right? Why not replace everything? Well, it's one of those moments we've all had when you're working on a project that you're missing a part that you should have or you thought you had, and kind of makes you want to scream into a void. But it's happened on dozens of automotive projects for me and other projects like this. So I think I'm going to order those parts. I'm going to get those parts. They're cheap, and go ahead and replace everything. Again, I could probably get away with just reusing these. These are kind of unique too. You can see that little bit of brown residue, rust residue, corrosion. They're not exactly flat. They have little indents on the back of them, and I'm not sure why that is, but these are, again, that's nylon, and these are kind of a softer plastic material. So and that's rubber. So anyway, that is way too much. Sorry for being long-winded, but I wanted to explain what I encountered, because if you're doing this job, you will encounter the same. Okay, it's high time that we wrap up this project. I'll review what's been done to this pressure washer, and as you can see, it is all reassembled. Just to go over what has been done on the motor side or engine side, the carburetor has been cleaned on this Honda GX390. That was just a cleaning, not a rebuild, and then I did an oil change on the engine as well. On the pump side, the pump head has been fully rebuilt, so all the O-rings, seals, the plungers / valves, everything within that pump head has been rebuilt, and then the pump has been reattached to the crankcase. On the crankcase side, I drained and refilled the oil, and I did use the genuine article. This is the AR crankcase oil, which also goes as the triplex plunger pump crankcase oil. So it goes by a couple different names, but it's the real McCoy. And I was curious about this as to who manufactures it for AR and really what is it. I believe it is an SAE 30 base oil with some friction modifiers added. It is blue in color. It does not smell like gear oil. It doesn't smell like motor oil, but it does kind of smell like something between like automatic transmission fluid and DOT4 brake fluid. It actually, for the most part, just smells like brake fluid, but nevertheless, it is the genuine article. 16 ounces for $16, so $1 an ounce, and this required 14 of 16 ounces from this bottle to refill the crankcase, and that is filling it up to where it shows properly on the dipstick. And the dipstick's on this, well, it's on the bottom side of this yellow cap here. So that's the story there. Now, what happens if you were to need to replace this entire pump? Well, the retail price for this exact pump online is $280. So if you kind of take a step back and think about the entire unit, this unit, the engine and the pump as you see it, and a cart either in the John Deere name or in another branded name such as Cat or DeWalt, which I've seen this exact motor and pump, these components on a different brand of cart, you're looking at about $1,000. You're looking at about $1,000, maybe $900 or something like that if you catch one on sale. But that kind of gives you an idea of what you're in for if you have to replace the pump versus the entire unit. It's about just under $300 for the pump and close to $1,000 for this entire setup. And like I said, I've seen this exact setup under other brand names. But again, there's nothing about this that's John Deere necessarily. It's just, the cart and the decals, the components themselves, Honda and AR. So that more or less wraps it up, and I hope this has been helpful. The most difficult part of this project has been, as I showed in the earlier in the video, getting the valves and the corroded parts out of the pump head itself. And I had to do a couple different things there to make that happen. But otherwise, I've been very happy with this pressure washer, and I would recommend this pump and engine to anyone, really. So again, hope this has been helpful. And now we're moving on to the next project.